Having two canopies out is a pretty dangerous situation. So we're going to talk about what causes that and how to prevent it. The number one cause of having two canopies out is deploying your main parachute too low. For example, if you deploy your main parachute at 1,500 feet, it could still be inflating and sniveling, passing through the altitude that triggers the AAD to deploy the reserve parachute. This is one reason altitude awareness is so important. Another situation that can cause two canopies out is if you have a malfunctioning main parachute and don't cut away at the decision altitude of 2,500 feet. In this example, you are still falling fast enough to trigger the AAD to deploy the reserve parachute. Issues with your pilot chute can also lead to a situation where you have two canopies out. A collapsible pilot chute that is not packed correctly can cause the main parachute to open slowly or not even open at all. A main parachute that is opening slowly may still be in the opening and inflation process, passing through the AAD triggering altitude, initiating the reserve deployment. An old or extremely worn pilot chute can also have the same effect. Most student gear does not have a collapsible pilot chute. Next time you're at the drop zone, find an instructor and have them show you what a collapsible pilot chute looks like and how it's different than a non-collapsible pilot chute. This is another reason to protect your handles while in the airplane, moving around the airplane, or climbing in or out. If your reserve handle halfway gets caught on something, it could pull the reserve pin out just a little bit and eventually enough so that it works its way loose while in free fall. Now your reserve is opening potentially at the same time that you've deployed your main parachute. And like we covered in a previous section, an AAD in student mode may fire the reserve parachute if you're doing hard turns below 1,000 feet. So again, no hard turns below 1,000 feet. Now we're going to talk about what you need to do if you get in a situation where both canopies get deployed at the same time. In this case, both your main and reserve are deployed into the air. There's three different situations that we'll talk about. The first is called a biplane, where the canopies are basically stacked right on top of each other. In this case, you're going to leave the brakes stowed and you're going to still steer the front canopy with the rear risers if you can. If you can't control the front canopy with the rear risers, you can try to control the canopy with the front toggles also. In this situation, you're going to want to fly as straight as possible and don't flare for landing. You want to be ready to PLF once you land, but a cutaway is not recommended. This is considered a stable biplane configuration, and ideally these two canopies stacked on top of each other will stay in a stable situation. This is the second configuration for having two canopies out, called side by side. The canopies are effectively in a stable configuration, bumping together and staying close together. You have two options in this situation. First, if the canopies are not entangled, you can cut away the main parachute and land and fly the reserve parachute. You have to make sure the canopies are not entangled. If you cut away and the main parachute is entangled, it can create more of a situation because your reserve can become entangled also. The second option is to keep both canopies, do not cut away, and fly the canopies together to landing. In this situation, you're going to use the rear risers to try and keep the canopies bumping together. You're going to want the canopies to stay together. That way they don't split apart and turn into the third scenario of a downplane. This is the third scenario, called a downplane. In a downplane, both the main and reserve parachute are basically pointed directly at the ground. In this situation, you're going to want to cut away the main parachute and then land under the reserve parachute.